Hey everybody, it's Jolie Jordan, the WPRA's roping director. And now that all these great PRCA rodeos are adding breakaway roping to their events, and the PRCA and the WPRA have a new agreement, all entries for breakaway ropers are going to be going through the PRCA's entry system known as PROCOM. So this video is just going to give you all a few little tips and tricks and just make sure everybody understands how PROCOM works, and lets everybody get entered up and go rope. The first step will be to go look at your approval online to get all the information you need before you go to enter. If you go to the WPRA.com, schedule tab at the top, choose the roping division. This will show you all of the events which are approved for roping points within the WPRA. The ones that are highlighted in yellow are going to be the ones that are breakaway ropings approved with PRCA rodeos. So scroll down through your list till you find the rodeo that you are looking for, and we will pick we'll pick Belfish, South Dakota as an example here. Click on that event and it will open up the entire approval for you. And this has got all the information that you will need. First of all, member dues date. That will tell you when you must have your membership purchased by in order to enter this event. Entry information is there. EOO is entry office opens. EC entries close. You'll want to look at eligibility. This one's all cards and permits. Sometimes an event might be all cards. So permit holders will not be eligible to enter that event. The ground rules are very important. You'll want to definitely check out ground rules. This particular approval is pretty straightforward. It's got a co-approval, so it will count for circuit points for those ladies in the Mountain State circuits as well as the Badlands and Prairie and Montana circuits. Sometimes if an event is going to be multiple go-rounds or if there's going to be any kind of limitations on the entry numbers, all of that will be contained within those ground rules. You'll want to look at perps times and slack to figure out which day is going to work for your schedule before you call PROCOM, because they will ask you for 2 preferences for when you are up. And that information will be there under the perps and the slacks. When the entries open, you will call the number listed here for PROCOM to get entered up. You'll need to give your membership number to the operator once he or she answers the phone. They will ask, what your business is for that day. You might say, I want to enter this rodeo in this event, or if it's a turnout or a release, you'll say that is what you need. If you're entering, they will then ask you if you have any buddies. You must have all of your membership numbers for everyone that you're buddying into your group. You can buddy up to 4 people in one buddy group within one event. Unfortunately, at this time, there is no cross-event buddying, so you can't buddy yourself if you're also running barrels, for example, or with a husband or family member with the PRCA. Hopefully that will change in the future. Once you have got your buddy group all established, then you will give your preferences, and you can give up to 2. From our example at Belfish, South Dakota, you might say, I would like to be in the 4th performance, make that my first preference, and we'll back it with slack on July 3rd. That would be examples of preferences that you can give. If you do have any issues or you're having trouble getting through on the regular PROCOM line, you can use that local line in case of an emergency. Once you've completed your entry, the operator will read it back to you for accuracy. Really important to listen to that. Make sure that your membership numbers for you and everyone in your group are correct, and that your preferences are correct, and that they correspond to the dates and times of the slacks or performances that you were wanting to enter for. Always keep track of your confirmation numbers from your entries. That confirmation number they will give you, the first 2 digits will be the operator's personal number, the second 2 will be the date of the month, and the last 4 indicate the time of day. That's so that they can go chase down the tapes of those calls if there is any discrepancy or problem with your entry, and then they can correct it after listening to the tape to figure out what happened on the issue there, if there is one. Once that is all confirmed, the operator will let you know when that particular event will be closing, how long the grace period will be. We'll talk about that more in a minute, and when your callbacks are. Also, your callbacks will be emailed to you, but you can also always call back into PROCOM and get that callback information. Really important to write all that down as well, or keep those emails. If you get to an event on a day when your callback tells you you are up and they do not have you, then you will need to be able to give them either that confirmation number from the call to PROCOM or that email to show that there is a discrepancy in when you were told you would be competing to the judges so that they can sort it out. It's important to be aware that there are a number of entry parameters that are valid when you're entering rodeos. Those are all spelled out in Rules 10.4.4 in the rule book, but I'm going to go through just a few of them here. The first is the out-if preference. You can use this to apply to number of go-arounds or specific days or slacks, etc. So for example, I might give a preference of 2 out of slack. If I do not draw high enough on the priority list to be placed in that second performance or thrown into any other performance and they're going to place me in that slack, they will simply draw me out. It's a good option if there's only one day that works for you. Likewise, you can do out of 2 go-rounds or something like that. Those are all spelled out in the rule book. A similar concept is a no same day or no same preference parameter. This allows you to not be drawn up at the rodeo you are entering on top of another event that you have already entered and have your position. So no same day, just like it sounds. If I'm up at Belfish, South Dakota on Saturday, they will not draw me up on another rodeo on that same Saturday for that weekend. If I give no same day, I will simply be drawn out if that's going to happen. No same preference works the same way, but it breaks your day up into 3 segments: a morning, an afternoon, and an evening. So in my example, if I'm up at Belfish on Saturday night, I could potentially be drawn at another rodeo in the Saturday matinee performance, but not in the Saturday night performance. So these are good options if you're limited in your positions that are available and you don't want to be conflicted and be forced to turn out of any particular rodeo. Valid preferences when you're entering basically as any specific performance, any specific slack. You can also just say generic slack, and you can give middle. It's important to double check your slack info with the operator when you're entering because sometimes that info can change. It's rare, but it does occasionally happen, so it's always a good idea to double check. The middle only applies to 2 go-around events and is defined as the performance or slack in which the first go-round ends. So in a 2 go-round event, you might give middle if you're wanting to try to get both of your go-rounds closer together and not have to be in that particular event or that particular city for very long. Once the entries have closed, you have a few options if something has happened with your plans and you're not going to be able to attend that event. If it's still in that grace period right after entries have closed, you can call PROCOM back and draw out. There are no penalties assessed with that. It'll just be like you were never entered to begin with. If it's after the grace period has ended and callbacks have been sent out, you have the 3 options listed here. You can turn out or release or use a visible injury release. With a turnout, you have to call and turn out through PROCOM, make that official turnout at least 3 hours prior to your scheduled performance or slack. If it's a morning slack, you'll have to do it by the day before. If there is a performance the day before, it'll be by the turnout deadline for that performance. If there is not a performance, the turnout deadline will be 5 o'clock Colorado time. With the turnout, you're still responsible to pay your entry fees, and you will be a turnout fine assessed as well, but you will be able to continue to compete as normal. With a release, it's the same process, 3 hours prior, and it has to be done officially through PROCOM. But you will not be responsible to pay entry fees on a release. You will still pay a $25 fine for each rodeo that you release out of. With a release, you will also be required to not compete anywhere for 7 days. There is that ineligibility period there. If those options aren't going to work, if you're already at the rodeo and something happens, if your horse comes up sore or you're injured or something, you have the option to use a visible injury. You will need to go to the secretary and obtain a visible injury release form, which you'll have to sign and get the judges at that event to sign off for you as well. The visible injury does not relieve you of the duty to pay for your entry fees, but it will save you a turnout fine or a non-notified turnout fine, which is what happens if you do not turn out by the 3 hours prior. So it just saves you on some of those fines, but you can still go ahead and compete the next day if you'd like, or within that 7 days. It's kind of a hybrid between the turnout and the release. The grace period begins right after the entries close and will run for a set amount of time, which they will tell you when you enter. Usually it's anywhere from an hour to 2.5 hours. During that grace period, you can draw out if needed and you can change your preferences. However, you cannot enter. You must enter by the entry closing time. What usually happens in the grace period is that the committee and or stock contractor will call and see their numbers and set up the rodeo, so that once you're in the grace period, you can call into PROCOM and you can find out how they're going to set things up. If there was any question as to number of go-arounds, you might know it by then. They will let you know how many they're probably going to put into the performances, or if there's more than one slack, they might give you an idea of how many are going to each slack. Also, it's important to know that if there's more than one slack indicated on the approval form and one says if needed, that slack may or may not be used, and usually during the grace period you can find out if it is in fact going to be used or not. So when you call back during that grace period, you can check all that information and see how things are going to be set up. You can also ask how many other members are asking for each preference and get an idea of your odds of drawing the preference that you have asked for. It's important to be open to being flexible during this grace period. If you call back and you're asking for the first performance and there are 40 other contestants asking for that, you know your odds are a little less that you're going to draw that. So you might look at another possible preference, another day that might work for you, and you might change it during that grace period. Once you've gotten your call back, if for any reason the position you've drawn doesn't work, you do always have the option to trade. Trade rules are listed under Rules 10.6 in the rule book. You need to familiarize yourself with those, and trades must be done by the trade deadline designated within the approval in the ground rules. The first step to making a trade is to obtain an emailed trade list through the PROCOM's automated system. So when you first dial in, you choose 6 for trade lists. To get a breakaway trade list, just a little bit tricky. As of June 2020 right now, they are treating breakaway ropings at pro rodeos as their own separate events. So once you've gone through the steps and you've gotten to the rodeo state and you're getting all those options for the cities and rodeos within that particular state, you will have to make sure you're choosing the one that is the breakaway roping. So in our example with Belle Fourche, it might say press 1 for Belle Fourche, press 2 for Belle Fourche Breakaway. Obviously you pick Breakaway. Once you're into that final step there, this is where it gets tricky. You have to pick number 8, which will say barrel racing, but that will be the breakaway list within that option there. So make sure you go with 8 and it should give you the correct list. Once you've gotten the list and you've found someone and you all have talked and agreed to make a trade, you both will have to make that trade official by calling PROCOM. One person calls the PROCOM trade line, which is listed here, to initiate the trade, and the second person then will call and confirm. As always, write down your confirmation numbers on trades as well, and they usually process by the end of the day that you've made them, so that by the next day you can usually double check your callback information and make sure that the trade has officially been made. Well, that's it. You're all entered up. Last step, just go get the money. If you have any questions or concerns, you can always reach out to me, your director, as well as the WPRA office. We're happy to answer any questions you might have. Best of luck out on the road, ladies.